Hey everyone, it's Dr. Romney. So let's talk about how vulnerable narcissistic folks slowly turn you not only into their supply, but also into basically their pacifiers. So vulnerable narcissism, some of you may call this covert narcissism, some of you might call it neurotic narcissism. It's the less known but more vexing form of narcissism in relationships, so more and more people know what it is now. Instead of the grandiose, extroverted, charming, charismatic, bragging, look at me narcissism, which is sort of our traditional take on narcissism, it's more of a victimized, resentful, sullen, passive-aggressive, woe is me, malcontented, irritable, at times even socially awkward form of narcissism. Vulnerable narcissistic folks also have some abandonment fears and will constantly test the other person in the relationship as well. Grandiose narcissistic people at first may inspire attraction by us, right? And then over time, as we get to know them, and we might start rolling our eyes at them in annoyance, but they can be fun too. Malignant narcissistic folks, by and large, inspire fear. Vulnerable narcissistic folks tend to inspire pity. They lack the shine or the menace of the other forms of narcissism, but that also makes this more complicated. You may vacillate between being endlessly frustrated at the vulnerable narcissist, but then feel really guilty if you find yourself getting mad at them. And vulnerable narcissistic folks are absolutely excellent at being the victim, behaving as though they were wronged, and pulling stunts like the silent treatment. You're with me so far, right? And I have no doubt that more than a few of you are in these kinds of relationships. But for a long time, you didn't have a name for this pattern. You may have even felt like a bad person for being frustrated and angry with a person who was like this. And you might even have found yourself vacillating between anger and pity for them. Well, here is something that frequently happens in these vulnerable narcissistic relationships. And after I say it, drop in the comments if this happened to you, right? They will test you. They will poke and poke and poke you some more, and then say something to you like, "You really don't like me, do you?" Or, "You don't want me to be here." Or, "You can't stand this family, right?" Or, "You think I'm a loser, right?" Something in that vein. Most of the time, sadly and interestingly, they're right. You don't like them. You don't want to be there. You don't like the family. And yeah, you do think, well, loser's not a nice word, but yeah, loser, or definitely not a solid person. But you, as an empathic soul, don't want to say something hurtful like that to them because it's not nice. And again, it's hurtful. So you might end up falling down the reassuring rabbit hole of course, I like you. I love you. You may even go a bridge further, especially if this is your parent and there was a time when you were a child that you would have had to win them over for survival and attachment reasons and say, "Oh my gosh, no, you're great." And you may even go even further and either apologize or put yourself down and say things like, "Oh, I'm so sorry I don't show it more. It's me. It's me. I have an avoidant attachment. I don't always show my appreciation." So a couple of things then happen. The vulnerable narcissist is rewarded for their manipulative, victimized banter and saying stuff like, "You really don't like me." It also plays on your empathy, and whether for trauma-bonded reasons or you just being nice, you will let them know, no, it's me, it's not you. Yes, it is. And then you'll say, "I'm sorry," which will end up leaving you feel ashamed and frustrated and angry. And they have now been rewarded for this behavior. And guess what? Because they've been rewarded, they're going to do it again. Grandiose narcissistic people, in a way, they're really more transparent. They'll say stuff like, "Aren't I amazing?" Or, come on now, everyone, tell me how great I am." Or they'll be willing to put stuff on social media designed to get them validation and admiration and cause envy in other people, and they're really good at tooting their own horn. Malignant narcissistic people get their validation by knowing that people are a little scared of them, and they fall into line just to avoid their wrath. But with the vulnerable folks, they get their supply through this passive-aggressive manipulation. Ultimately, you are telling them that they're great or wonderful or reassuring them that you want to be there with them. This whole thing pushes you into a deeply inauthentic space of saying things that are frankly patently untrue for you, but you may be saying them out of guilt, pity. Perhaps when you were a child, you said them out of fear, or because you want your parent to know that of course you love them and are afraid that they will go silent on you if you didn't reassure them. This sort of reassurance mess can become almost automatic in these relationships. And you aren't doing it out of the sort of menacing fear you might be experiencing like a person would in a malignant narcissistic relationship, but rather you may be doing this because you feel bad. Vulnerable narcissistic folks are complicated because it's not unusual for there to be some other psychiatric or psychological issue happening, depressed moods, a fair amount of anxiety. People who are vulnerable narcissistic folks may even have potentially some more complex histories of trauma, neglect, or other difficult histories. Vulnerable narcissistic people, you're not going to see that same kind of glib, charismatic arrogance that we often see in grandiose narcissistic folks. And instead, what we see is a person who is actually pretty interpersonally unskilled. So while the grandiose narcissistic person can get supply in a variety of ways by posturing and trumpeting and exaggerating or lying about their achievements, they do things like flirt and they post nonsense on social media or pursue fame or notoriety or spend lots of money. Whatever they need to get attention. A vulnerable narcissistic person will engage in lots of reassurance seeking. And that reassurance seeking can devolve into manipulation. So to get that supply of somebody telling the vulnerable narcissist, we like you, or you're good, you're fine, it has to turn into a more victimized positioning of an accusation of saying something like, well, you don't like me. That puts the other person on the defensive and gets the vulnerable narcissist the answer they want. Over time, the people around the vulnerable narcissistic person will have a complex mix of emotions, including resentment, pity, exhaustion, and certainly don't enjoy spending time with them. And it gets perceived and it turns into these sad statements that the vulnerable narcissistic person picks up on, and that can keep you stuck in a loop forever. Most people say that getting out of a relationship with any narcissist is hard, but getting out of a relationship with someone who's a vulnerable narcissist is much more difficult because the kindest parts of you may find it hard to dislodge yourself. And frankly, a narcissistic relationship or system is no place to speak your truth. It's pointless, and it just ends up stoking dysfunctional flames. So when they tell you, you don't like me, or you don't like this family, or you resent me, it's the most difficult balancing act. Answering truthfully is pointless and saying, no, I don't like you. But whatever empty reassurance you have to offer, remember at least that it is a signal about how one-sided this relationship is. And if you do feel that you need to keep engaging in it, hold tight onto those slippery rocks of radical acceptance and recognize that no matter how many times you cross your fingers behind your back and tell them, of course I like ya. Of course I like spending time with you. They're going to keep accusing you of otherwise. It's sort of a victimized form of gaslighting, having someone tell you how you feel. But it hits a little close to home because it's true and may actually not be gaslighting if they're kind of landing on something that is actually quite true, but you know it's not comfortable or even sensible to express it. But it also illuminates how we get sucked so deep into these relationships, or if it is family, can find it almost impossible to ever set a boundary or disengage in a manner that feels healthy. So any of you have gone through this, Again, drop it in the comments. But I'm hoping that shedding some light on this can help you know you're definitely not alone, and it is a tough cycle to extricate from. Thanks again.